Because in the grim darkness of the far future, an angel is not a symbol of salvation, but a prophecy of suffering. Before his name was whispered by trillions, before statues immortalized his tragic beauty, before his blood soaked the golden steps of the imperial palace, Sanguinius opened his eyes to a sky filled not with hope, but radiation burned clouds and poisoned winds. His first breath tasted of death. His first sight was of ruins older than memory. His first cry echoed through a world where mercy was extinct. To understand him, to understand the horrifying life of Sanguinius, is to understand that some beings are born with greatness carved into their bones, and despair waiting patiently in their future. He landed on Baal Secundus not as a savior, but as an anomaly, a screaming infant cast from the warp like a discarded celestial secret. His cradle was not the arms of a loving mother, but the cracked stone and glassed sands of a world killed by its own past. Nuclear storms shrieked across shattered valleys where civilization once stood tall. Tribes scoured the wasteland not for food, but for something to eat, a difference that mattered more to survival than morality ever could. Mutants roamed freely, bone-spurred horrors who had forgotten language generations before. In that landscape of broken humanity, a child with pale skin, golden hair, and wings was not a miracle, he was a question. A dangerous question, and in Baal Secundus, questions were often answered with spears. But the spear never came. Instead, terror did. The first tribe that found him did not celebrate him, they fled from him. Adults screamed at the sight of white wings unfurling in the storm winds. Old stories told of ghosts with feathers that stole children from tents. Of winged mutants who fed on fear. His existence revived every nightmare those tribes had fought to bury beneath starvation and exhaustion. Yet as days turned to weeks, the angel child did not die. He survived the storms. He survived the poisoned dust. He survived the radiation that gnawed flesh from bone. And rumors began to spread like myths reborn, of a winged boy wandering the wastes, untouched by death. Sanguinius grew faster than any child should. Not by choice, by nature. His wings, once fragile ivory limbs, grew powerful, catching the howling winds as though answering an instinct older than the world that birthed him. His eyes, sorrowful, thoughtful, far too ancient for a boy, saw humanity at its worst before he ever saw it at its best. He watched tribes slaughter one another for water. He watched children become soldiers before they could speak. He learned early that compassion was a resource more rare than ammunition. Yet the greatest horror he faced in those early years was not the mutants that prowled the dark, nor the starvation that thinned his frame, it was loneliness so vast that even the storms could not drown it. For every child born different has asked a simple question, why am I like this? But he had no language to form it, no voice to release it, no companion to hear it. He lived as a creature fulfilling instinct, hunting, hiding, surviving. An angel reduced to an animal, not by fate, but by context. When the tribe finally approached again, it was not with fear, but desperation. They were dying, too few, too weak, too hunted. And when they saw the boy again, taller, stronger, his wings wrapped around himself like a cloak, they did not see a monster. They saw possibility. Sanguinius, without words, without understanding social hierarchies or fear, simply approached them, and the exhausted tribe understood something instinctively. Anything that could survive alone in Baal's wastes was not to be feared, but followed. He became their shelter, their protector, their silent guardian long before humanity gave him titles soaked in reverence and regret. For the first time, when he hunted, he did not eat alone. When he stood watch, he guarded others. When the mutated beasts attacked, he fought, and his wings were no longer symbols of terror, but shields that wrapped around children shivering in the night. They began to call him Angel, not because they believed in angels, but because they needed to. Yet even then, even young, Sanguinius sensed a shadow trailing him. He was admired, but never understood. Loved, but never equal. He slept apart. He sat apart. He spoke little, though his eyes said enough to those brave enough to meet them. In every celebration, he remained an outsider whose perfection reminded them of everything they had lost. And while he protected them from the horrors of Baal, he could not protect himself from the quiet horror of destiny, the growing knowledge that he was not meant for this world. That the storm which brought him here was not a mistake. That the universe had plans for him, and the universe was not kind. Because legends don't grow from peace. Legends grow from blood, and Baal Secundus would soon give him reason to shed it. When the destiny of an entire people rests not on a throne, not on an army, but on the wings of a single young warrior who never asked for power. As Sanguinius continued to grow, so too did the dangers surrounding the tribe that depended on him. Baal Secundus was relentless, a world where survival was not a privilege but a debt extracted in blood. Radiation storms carved through flesh like acid, and the night brought with it creatures whose eyes shimmered with hunger and mutation. Yet for the first time, the tribe began to hope, and hope, in a place like Baal, was a dangerous luxury. But stay with me until the end of this story, because the reward for understanding the truth behind Sanguinius' horrifying path, the revelation of the burden he carried from the moment he took flight, is a perspective on Warhammer 40K's most tragic figure that you may have never considered. To the tribe, he was a savior. To the wasteland, he was a challenge. The mutants learned his scent, the wastes recognized his silhouette in the storm clouds, and predators that once hunted humans now stalked a greater prize, the winged anomaly. He fought not out of glory or pride, but because pain was the only language Baal understood. He bled often, not because he was weak, but because even the strong must pay a toll to survive. The tribe watched him grow from a silent guardian to a leader whose very presence shaped their confidence. They began to build again, crude shelters carved from wreckage, fire pits surrounded by worn stones, weapons sharpened on the remnants of forgotten machines. Under the shadow of his wings, humanity dared to breathe. Yet in those brief moments of peace, a different kind of fear emerged, a quiet, lingering question whispered around dying firelight. If he was sent to them, then who sent him? And why? Sanguinius pondered the same puzzle in silence, staring at the sickened sky that never revealed stars. He was different, undeniably so, but difference is not a destiny, and even an angel can feel the weight of isolation. He began to sense things others could not, distant tremors in the ground, the chemical taste of an approaching storm, the subtle sound of footsteps in sand days before danger arrived. These abilities protected the tribe, but they also separated him further. Gratitude can build a pedestal, and a pedestal is only a lonely cliff painted gold. The turning point came on a night where the wind fell silent, and the air grew thick with the metallic taste of disaster. The sky churned green, lightning without thunder, fracturing the darkness. From the horizon emerged not mutants, not beasts, but something far worse. Humans from another tribe, armed, starving, and desperate. War on Baal was never political. There were no flags, no treaties, no negotiations. There was only need, and need is the sharpest weapon ever forged. When they attacked, they expected frightened resistance, not an angel descending like vengeance itself. Sanguinius fought as if born to command the battlefield. His wings drove wind into whirlwinds, his strikes were precise yet filled with sorrow. He killed not because he wanted to win, but because survival demanded it. The tribe survived, but the victory changed everything. The stories spread faster than the storms. The mutants, the humans, the wasteland itself, all now knew the truth. Baal Secundus belonged to the angel. And when a world knows your name, it begins to write your fate without permission. That is what settled over Baal Secundus in the days following Sanguinius' victory. The dust from the battle had long settled, yet the weight of what had happened did not. The tribe had lived through countless storms, attacks, and tragedies, but never before had they tasted triumph in the face of overwhelming force. Victory is intoxicating, and like any intoxicant, it alters perception. The people who once feared him now revered him, some with devotion, others with envy, and a quiet few with suspicion sharpened by memory and superstition. Because when a miracle walks among mortals, some kneel, some follow, and some look for the flaw that proves it is not a miracle at all. Sanguinius noticed the shift, even if he didn't understand its full meaning. Children watched him with wide-eyed wonder, elders with the measured caution of those who have buried hope too many times. His existence was no longer a question, they had decided the answer: angel, savior, protector. But such titles come with expectations sharp enough to wound. He could not show weakness, hunger, fear. They looked to him for confidence even when his bones ached and his wings bled. Leadership, he learned, is less about commanding others and more about being denied the right to falter. It was during this time that Sanguinius began to dream. Dreams not born from memory, because what memory could he have of such places, but visions carved from something deeper. He saw great halls bathed in golden light, walls adorned with banners carrying symbols he did not recognize yet somehow understood. He saw warriors, thousands of them, marching in unity greater than anything Baal had ever offered. And above them all, a figure stood, not with wings, but with a presence that eclipsed even Sanguinius' own. This figure's face was hidden, shadowed, radiant and obscured simultaneously, like trying to stare into the sun and understand its expression. Sanguinius woke from these dreams not rested, but compelled, as though the visions were pulling him toward a future he had not chosen. Then came the vision that changed everything. In this dream, the sky burned, not just Baal's sickly storm sky, but a sky filled with fire that rained onto worlds far from his own. He saw monstrous forms wrapped in malice, flesh shaped by nightmares, armored giants shedding rivers of blood with every step. He saw humanity, not the tribe, not Baal, but a civilization vast and desperate, fighting itself as often as its enemies. And in the center of it all, he saw himself, sword raised, wings torn, surrounded by shadows that called his name like a curse and a prayer in the same breath. When he awoke, his heart was not filled with dread, but recognition. As if fate had finally whispered a secret he had always suspected, he was not meant to remain on Baal. His survival here was not his destiny, only the proof that he could endure the destiny waiting elsewhere. But destiny is not a road that appears in front of you, destiny is a storm that breaks above you, whether you are ready or not. Because dreams do not come without consequence. And soon, the consequences of his existence would descend from the stars. For years, Baal Secundus had been a world sealed beneath its own suffering, unchanging, unrelenting, unforgiving. But the sky, which had always been nothing more than a poisoned canvas of storms and radiation, finally broke its silence. The tribe was gathered around dwindling flames when the night turned wrong, not dark, but bright. A streak of light cut across the heavens, carving its way through the suffocating clouds. At first, the people believed it to be another storm, a phenomenon born from the death rattles of a dying planet. But Sanguinius knew better. He felt it, not as a threat, but as an answer. The ground shook, but not with the randomness of Baal's tremors. This was deliberate, controlled, purposeful. The sound rushed across the wasteland like the sky itself was splitting open, a thunder not born from nature but machinery far beyond the understanding of Baal's fractured tribes. Many fell to their knees, prayer tumbling from lips that had forgotten how to form hopeful words. Others screamed and ran, fearing the return of the myths that had haunted them, gods, monsters, and spirits long buried by starvation and desperation. Sanguinius stood still. The wind caught his wings, lifting them like banners, and for the first time he looked small against the sky, not a guardian towering over humanity, but a child before the vastness of the universe calling his name. The object, metallic, enormous, descending with precision, broke through the clouds and slowed with impossible grace. Sanguinius felt something awaken in his blood, a resonance that vibrated through bone and sinew. This was not random. This was not chance. The universe wasn't asking permission, it was arriving. The tribe whispered questions they had no language for. Was it salvation? Was it destruction? On Baal, both often wore the same face. The vessel landed, the scorched earth turning to glass beneath it, and silence followed, not the silence of emptiness but the silence before history shifts. When the doors opened, and the first armored figure emerged, taller than any human they had seen, clad in technology that defied comprehension, the people recoiled. But Sanguinius did not. That same resonance in his blood intensified, not as fear, but as recognition. Without a word spoken, without a gesture exchanged, something ancient and binding passed between the winged youth and the armored giants. The tribe had believed Sanguinius to be the answer sent to them. But he realized in that moment, they had only been the beginning of a question far larger than their world. The largest figure stepped forward. Radiant, commanding, a presence that bent the air, not by force but by inevitability. The dreams Sanguinius had endured returned in flashes, gold, banners, armies, fire, shadows calling his name. The face he could never quite see now stood before him, real and undeniable. He was not stray. He was not accident. He was not child of Baal. He was found, and the universe had finally come to collect. If your deepest questions, your lifelong burdens, your nightmares and inexplicable instincts were suddenly reflected in eyes that had watched empires rise and die. For the first time since his arrival on Baal, Sanguinius felt something unfamiliar, not fear, not awe, understanding. The man he faced was not simply another warrior, nor a conqueror wearing the armor of gods. He emanated purpose so absolute that even silence felt like it was kneeling before him. This towering figure was the emperor of mankind. And though no announcement declared it, Sanguinius knew. Recognition sank into his bones like it had been waiting there all along. The tribe waited behind him, terrified, hopeful, confused, unable to comprehend the exchange unfolding in the scorched dust before them. The emperor approached slowly, not as a ruler demanding obedience, but as a father approaching a child he had lost to the stars. From birth, Sanguinius had been marked by sorrow, his wings a symbol of beauty and curse, but now, under the gaze of the emperor, those wings felt less like a burden than a revelation. The emperor had crossed the galaxy not for Baal, not for humanity, but for him. No grand speech was offered, no promises of paradise whispered. The emperor simply spoke his name, Sanguinius, with a weight that carried both expectation and regret. The tribe gasped. They had never heard it spoken aloud. Sanguinius had never revealed it, never remembered choosing it, yet hearing it fall from the emperor's lips felt like the final piece of a puzzle he had tried to solve since childhood. Destiny was not coming, it had arrived. The emperor spoke of brothers, 20 born, scattered, lost. Children crafted not from chance but design. Sanguinius was not mutation, he was blueprint. Not aberration, architecture. A Primarch. One of many, yet unlike any of them. His wings were not deformity, they were declaration. Proof that even the harshest worlds could not break what was meant to shape the galaxy itself. But destiny is never one-sided. With the revelation of purpose came the shadow of cost. The emperor spoke of unity, of crusade, of mankind rising from the ashes of forgotten ages. He painted a future where humanity no longer crawled through ruins but soared among stars. And yet, even in the emperor's voice, steady, commanding, there was an undertone Sanguinius could feel more than hear: inevitability. That greatness demanded sacrifice. That glory required pain. That the universe did not hand out heroes, it carved them. Sanguinius turned back to the tribe, the people who had feared him, followed him, survived because of him. He saw every scar they bore, every loss etched into their faces. And they stared at him with a realization that stole their breath: the angel was leaving. Not because he wished to abandon them, but because Baal had never been his destination, only his trial. The emperor extended a hand, not invitation, but summons. Sanguinius stepped forward, not in hope, but in acceptance. The sky that once imprisoned him now opened, not as storm, but as path. And Baal Secundus, the world that raised an angel in ruin, watched him ascend, not as guardian, not as myth, but as something far more terrifying. A leader chosen by fate, shaped by suffering, and bound to a future that promised both triumph and tragedy in equal measure. As Sanguinius left Baal behind, the wasteland shrinking beneath the vessel that carried him toward the stars, he felt the weight of transformation press against him like a second gravity. For the first time, he saw the galaxy not as dream fragments but as a living expanse, worlds upon worlds, civilizations breathing, rising, falling. The Emperor's words echoed in his mind, brothers. 20 reflections of a single purpose, scattered by forces that twisted intention into chaos. He wondered if they too had felt isolation shaping them. If they too carried questions that no one could answer. If any of them dreamed the same nightmares. When Sanguinius finally stood among the legions, he was met with awe. A Primarch, a being of legend made flesh. But when he met his brothers, those few found before him, he realized the galaxy had carved each differently. Some wore scars openly, others hid them behind laughter or stoicism. There were eyes that held storms, voices that carried secrets, and smiles that never reached the soul. His wings drew attention, admiration, curious envy, and a few concealed resentments from those who had demanded perfection but received power instead. Sanguinius, however, did not greet them as rivals or as royalty, but as kin. He listened before speaking, observed before assuming. It was not charisma that drew others to him, it was empathy born from years of surviving among those who depended on him. Warriors who had conquered worlds found themselves disarmed not by his strength, but by his startling capacity to understand pain without judgment. Many adored him, a rare few despised what they adored. And one, Horus, looked upon him not as competitor or curiosity, but as brother in the truest sense. Their bond formed quickly, naturally, two leaders shaped by expectation, admired by millions yet isolated in ways no ordinary man could comprehend. Horus was the charismatic flame, Sanguinius the guiding light. Horus, subtle transformation became impossible to ignore. In council, his words rang with conviction, yet a cold calculation undercut every promise. In battle, victories carried a new tone, an efficiency that bordered on cruelty. And whispers, soft, dangerous, intoxicating, began to spread through the legions, speaking of power beyond command, of freedom beyond duty. Sanguinius watched, silent, struggling to understand the threads woven between fate and choice. He had known sacrifice. He had known suffering. But he had never known the dread of betrayal before the blade was even drawn. The tension escalated like a pressure building in a vessel no one dared open. Reports from distant worlds brought chilling clarity. Entire populations annihilated, loyalty bought with terror, corruption spreading silently. And yet, when Sanguinius confronted Horus, when he searched for the brother he loved above all else, Horus smiled, not maliciously, not cruelly, but with the inevitability of a man already swept away by forces beyond comprehension. Words failed, explanation faltered. The gulf between them, invisible yet immense, yawned like a chasm no wings could bridge. Sanguinius' wings, once symbols of hope and protection, felt heavier than ever. Every decision, every command, every life he could touch carried consequences he could not yet foresee. His greatest enemy was not the Xenos, not the traitors, not the galaxy itself, but the betrayal that could only come from the one he called brother. And in that betrayal lay the seed of a war that would rend the universe, spilling blood on scales no mortal had ever measured. He understood then, with a clarity that terrified him, heroism is never a shield. Courage never guarantees survival. And even angels, with the mightiest wings, can fall, not by the strength of enemies, but by the choices of those they love most. The shadow of Horus stretched across Sanguinius' path, a dark harbinger whispering that destiny is never kind, and sometimes the greatest horrors come not from monsters but from the hands of family. Sanguinius, angel among men, Primarch among Primarchs, began to understand the true weight of perfection. The galaxy did not forgive mistakes. The Emperor did not overlook failure. Even the legions, those mighty forces of humanity, expected divinity in every action. And Sanguinius, whose wings had once been symbols of hope, whose presence had inspired entire worlds, found himself measured not by courage, not by wisdom, not by survival, but by a standard that allowed no mercy. To be perfect was to be alive, to fail was to shatter. He trained relentlessly, not because he wished to, but because every lapse could cost thousands, every hesitation could tip the scales of war, every weakness could be exploited by shadows he could barely perceive. His brothers, brilliant and fearsome, relied on his leadership and inspiration, but none could see the quiet torment that accompanied the gift of being unparalleled. Even his wings, magnificent and deadly, were constant reminders of what made him different, what made him alone. The stars themselves seemed to watch him, their light reflecting the duality of hope and suffering, and he realized something horrifying: perfection was never a blessing. It was a sentence. Yet Sanguinius endured, as he always had. Battle after battle, world after world, he carried the weight of expectation like the armor of the galaxy itself. He inspired, he protected, he conquered, but always, in quiet moments when none observed, he felt the strain of knowing that the tiniest mistake could unravel everything he had built. Dreams returned with greater intensity now. He saw Terra, the cradle of humanity, yet he also saw betrayal, fire, blood, and ruin. Every vision whispered a single, chilling truth. No matter how high he soared, the universe would demand more. Always more. And in this crucible of perfection, Sanguinius began to understand the most terrifying lesson of all. Even angels are mortal in spirit, and immortality is only granted to those who accept suffering as constant companion. Every life he saved, every legion he inspired, every world he freed was measured against a future he could not escape, a future where he would be tested not just by enemies but by destiny itself. Because the higher one flies, the more devastating the fall. Sanguinius, wings folded but heart wide, stared at the infinite expanse before him and whispered, not to anyone, not even to himself, but as if speaking to the universe itself, "I will not fail. I cannot fail." And yet, deep in the marrow of his being, he knew that perfection carried a price, and the debt had only begun to come due. For Sanguinius, the universe had been a test of endurance, strength, and loyalty, but he was about to face a challenge unlike any other. It did not arrive with armies, nor with fire, nor even with the roar of monsters. It arrived in whispers, subtle and seductive, carrying the weight of temptation that had corrupted men, legions, and worlds long before his birth. Chaos, the universe's oldest predator, patient, intelligent, and relentless, had extended a shadow toward him, and though he did not yet see its form, he could feel its presence in the quiet of his mind. It began in the dreams, visions that no logic could explain. Fires that burned without smoke. Faces that twisted into masks of betrayal. Entire cities decayed into nothingness in the blink of an eye. At first, Sanguinius believed them to be warnings of distant battles, echoes of the trials the Emperor had designed to temper him. But the whispers grew, and a terrible clarity emerged. These were not warnings. They were invitations. Power, immortality, freedom from the constant burden of perfection, it called to him. Every hero has a moment where choice becomes torment, and for Sanguinius, this was his. He understood immediately that the greatest danger was not physical, it was moral, spiritual, intrinsic. The legions looked to him for guidance. Worlds relied on him for salvation. And yet, the shadows of chaos promised a universe where fear, death, and sorrow could be conquered, not through virtue, not through loyalty, but through yielding. The thought alone was horrifying, because to resist it required not just strength, but the total mastery of every impulse, every desire, every ounce of pride. Sanguinius' wings, so long a symbol of protection and beauty, felt like chains, the weight of his own destiny pressing down harder than any storm of Baal ever could. He attempted to flee the visions, sought distraction in strategy and battle, but chaos is patient. It does not demand your attention, it seeps into your awareness until every choice, every moment, becomes a test. And in those moments, Sanguinius recognized the cruelest truth: even angels can be tempted. Even the most perfect can fall. And the universe, indifferent and eternal, watches quietly as heroes decide whether to resist or surrender. Every victory, every act of protection, every soldier saved was a counterweight to the pull of this darkness, but he could feel the scales tipping. The whispers spoke not only to him but through him, tempting even those who trusted him most. And for the first time, Sanguinius understood that the war he faced was not against enemies outside himself, but the corruption that could rise from within. The galaxy had prepared him for battles of sword and fire, but it had not prepared him for this. And the first shadow of chaos, subtle, patient, and all-consuming, had already found its way to his wings. Sanguinius had seen planets burned, civilizations rise and fall, and armies crushed beneath the ambition of men. He had led legions, inspired millions, and survived horrors no human, or angel, should endure. And yet, the knowledge that chaos was not just a distant threat, but a creeping, patient, intelligent force seeking to corrupt everything he loved, pressed upon him like a storm that would never break. The burden was invisible, but no less lethal than the sharpest blade. Every decision became a calculation, every interaction a potential fissure through which corruption could seep. He could not confide in anyone, not even his brothers, because understanding his vision would require them to accept the possibility of failure on a scale that would shatter morale. Even the Emperor, brilliant and unyielding, could not fully shield him from what was coming. And so, Sanguinius carried the weight alone, a silent sentinel between the forces of the universe and the fragile hope of mankind. He walked among his legion with a smile that masked the turmoil inside, offering inspiration even as doubt gnawed at his mind. He taught them courage, but could not teach them the fear that kept him awake at night. The dreams returned, more vivid, more painful, visions of betrayal and slaughter, of friends turned enemies, of a universe that devoured even those who strove to protect it. And with every vision, Sanguinius felt a strange, chilling clarity. The burden of knowledge was greater than the burden of war, for while battles could be fought with skill and courage, the future demanded sacrifices that no sword could carve. The angel of Baal, the son of the Emperor, the savior of countless worlds, he began to realize that destiny was no longer a path to triumph but a series of impossible choices, each heavier than the last. Every life he saved became another weight upon his conscience. Every victory became another expectation to uphold. And every moment of hesitation could ripple across galaxies, a silent, invisible tide of death and despair. And in that knowledge, he found a terrifying truth: even angels must pay. Even heroes must suffer. Even the purest hearts can bleed under the pressure of a universe that does not forgive, does not pause, and does not care. Sanguinius understood that the greatest battles were not fought with fists or swords, but in the mind and soul, where victory is invisible and failure is eternal. The burden of knowing, he realized, was the heaviest armor of all, and he would carry it alone. Sanguinius had led legions through countless battles, endured horrors on Baal and beyond, and faced enemies so monstrous they should have broken even the strongest minds. Yet nothing could prepare him for the first true loss, the shattering of trust, the impossible weight of failure, the knowledge that even angels could not save everyone. It came quietly at first, almost unnoticeable, a whisper of unease, a ripple in the order of things that he had always trusted. One of his closest lieutenants, a warrior who had fought by his side since the early days of the Great Crusade, was taken not by enemy fire, but by betrayal from within. The loss was sudden, brutal, and personal. Sanguinius felt it not in his body, but in his soul, a hollowing that no battle could repair. The battlefield around him remained active, warriors shouting, weapons screaming, but in that moment, all sound fell away. The weight of the universe pressed down, and he understood the first undeniable truth of leadership: no matter how mighty you are, some losses cannot be undone. Grief became a companion, silent and insistent. He could not show it, could not falter, could not allow the legions to sense that even their angelic Primarch could bleed under the pressure of reality. And yet, in the quiet of the night, in moments stolen from duty and expectation, Sanguinius felt it, a suffocating despair that threatened to pull him into the very darkness he had long fought to keep at bay. He understood something terrifying: victory and loss are inseparable. Hope and despair are two sides of the same coin, flipped endlessly by a universe that does not care who catches it. The first loss marked him, changed him. The bright angel who had inspired, protected, and uplifted countless lives now bore the knowledge that even perfection is powerless against inevitability. He understood that leadership was not just guidance or strategy, it was the constant reckoning with mortality, with failure, with the certainty that no shield, no sword, no wings could guard against every shadow. And from that moment on, every victory carried a shadow. Every battle, a reminder. Every life saved, a haunting echo of those that could not be. Sanguinius, angel among men, Primarch among Primarchs, felt the weight of mortality settle upon his shoulders, and it was heavier than any armor, sharper than any blade, colder than any void. Sanguinius had faced countless horrors and endured the relentless expectations of the galaxy, yet nothing tested him more than the subtle whispers of chaos. Its presence was no longer distant, no longer confined to dreams. It had begun to intrude into reality, twisting opportunities, inflating ambitions, and offering power beyond comprehension. It promised the ability to protect all those he loved, to prevent loss, to bend fate itself, and it demanded only one thing: surrender of the mind, submission of the will, and compromise of the soul. Sanguinius felt it in every bone, in every feather, in every beat of his heart. The temptation was invisible but undeniable, an itch in the mind that could not be ignored. Every loss he had endured, every vision of betrayal, every burden of perfection, chaos promised to relieve it all. No more sleepless nights, no more soldiers lost, no more worlds destroyed. And yet, he knew the cost. He had seen the fates of those who yielded before, once great heroes, once trusted leaders, now shattered husks corrupted by promises of impossible salvation. Their names were whispered as warnings. Their faces haunted nightmares. Even so, the temptation pressed against him relentlessly. In quiet moments, when the galaxy felt still, he imagined the power at his fingertips, control over time, over life, over destiny itself. He could end suffering before it began, strike enemies before they moved, and perhaps, just perhaps, save every soul under his command. Yet, deep inside, he knew that to accept this gift would not be victory, but annihilation of self. He would not simply wield power, he would become it, and in becoming, he would lose everything that made him human, angelic, alive. Sanguinius clenched his fists, feeling the weight of his wings press down upon him. Every instinct screamed to resist. Every lesson from Baal, every moment of suffering and survival, whispered the same truth. True strength is found in restraint, in sacrifice, in enduring despite the unbearable cost. He realized that heroism is not about wielding ultimate power, it is about knowing the darkness exists and choosing to walk through it anyway. The temptation lingered, patient and cruel, as if aware that his greatest battles were not fought on the field of war, but in the silent chambers of the mind. And Sanguinius, angel among men, Primarch among Primarchs, understood a chilling reality: the greater the power offered, the heavier the burden of rejecting it. He would not falter. He could not falter. For even angels must endure the shadows of temptation to remain what the universe demands them to be: a beacon, a guardian, a symbol of hope. Sanguinius had felt it, the subtle shift in the legions, the half-hidden glances of those who once called him brother, the distant murmurs that carried promises of freedom and power. He had faced enemies that bled worlds, horrors that devoured minds, and yet nothing in all the wars he had fought prepared him for the sense of betrayal creeping through the hearts of those he trusted most. The whispers of chaos had grown louder, infecting loyalty with doubt and ambition. Horus, the brother he had once believed to be steadfast, had begun to change in ways that no battle could explain. His laughter now carried a hardness that chilled Sanguinius' soul. His words, once full of camaraderie, now hinted at secrets and plans too vast, too insidious for the uninitiated to comprehend. And the legions, mighty and devoted, seemed to shimmer with uncertainty, an invisible tremor that threatened to ripple through the foundations of everything Sanguinius had built. He watched the galaxy, the stars stretching infinitely beyond, and felt a terrible realization settle like lead in his chest. Betrayal was not always sudden. It grew quietly, patiently, nurtured by ambition and fear, until the day it no longer could be hidden. Sanguinius understood then that the greatest battles were not fought with swords or artillery, they were fought in hearts and minds, in choices made when no one else was watching, in the slow corrosion of trust. And Horus, the brother he had loved above all, was walking the path that would collide with destiny, dragging with him everything the angel had sworn to protect. Even as he grappled with this realization, Sanguinius prepared. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with understanding. He had been forged by suffering, honed by survival, and tempered by the weight of impossible expectations. He knew that when the storm finally broke, when betrayal revealed itself in all its brutal clarity, he would face it not only for himself, but for every life depending on him. The shadow of treachery loomed, yet he stood, wings outstretched, unwavering. Because even in the face of betrayal, even when the greatest darkness came from the ones closest to him, Sanguinius knew this: an angel's purpose is not defined by comfort but by endurance. And the prelude to betrayal, terrifying as it was, would only prove the measure of the one who bore the galaxy on his shoulders. The galaxy that Sanguinius had known, the worlds he had saved, the legions he had inspired, the trust he had built, began to fracture with terrifying speed. Horus, once the brother he had loved and trusted above all, had embraced the shadows of chaos completely, transforming from ally to architect of the most insidious rebellion in the history of humanity, the Horus Heresy. The words themselves seemed too small for the devastation they carried. Heresy was no longer abstract. It was alive, moving through the stars, corrupting loyalties, spreading chaos like a cancer that no fire could burn away. Sanguinius felt every pulse of betrayal as if it were a physical blow. The legions, some still loyal, some seduced by promises of power, fractured along invisible lines. Worlds that had rejoiced at his arrival were now caught between loyalty and deception, their people pawns in a cosmic game where the stakes were infinite and the rules merciless. And in the eye of this storm stood Sanguinius, angel, warrior, Primarch, burdened not only with expectation but with the unbearable knowledge that he could not save everyone. The visions returned with sharper clarity. Fires that devoured cities, screams that tore across planets, brothers falling before he could reach them. Chaos had no need for armies against him, it corrupted from within. And yet, even as the weight pressed down, even as despair threatened to drown him, Sanguinius rose. His wings spread wide, a living banner of hope against a galaxy that teetered on the edge of oblivion. Every action, every decision, every sacrifice became more than duty, it became defiance. The angel of Baal could not stop the heresy entirely, but he could fight. He could inspire. He could endure. But endurance has its limits. Every battle, every victory, every attempt to protect the innocent drew him further into the web of conflict. The shadow of Horus loomed larger with each passing day, and the heresy was no longer a distant threat, it was immediate, tangible, and relentless. Sanguinius realized that the struggle was not just against enemies wielding swords and guns, but against betrayal, ambition, and the unrelenting pull of fate itself. And the universe, indifferent and eternal, watched as its greatest angel prepared for the most impossible of fights. Because in the galaxy of the far future, heroes are never safe. Angels bleed, trust can shatter,